There are 2.6 million deaths a year caused by alcohol consumption.
There is this endless deluge of a glass of red wine a day is the equivalent of an hour in the gym. Even I read that going, it'd be great if that was true. Maybe it's a little bit true. It couldn't be completely wrong.
Alcohol is what's called a type 1 carcinogen. It's within the same category as asbestos, radiation and tobacco.
Can we start by talking about your personal relationship with alcohol? I've certainly gone out with you and I've drunk. I believe you do drink, but then I couldn't actually remember. Maybe you didn't.
Yes, I do drink alcohol. I've been to France and Italy several times and I've been on winery tours. I think it's recognising that we can both enjoy alcohol and have memories where we've enjoyed alcohol, but similarly, what can happen is then the industry can start to create experiences centred around alcohol so that we basically they shape what we come to understand as enjoyment or a particular event. And also this insinuation that you have to have alcohol in order to enjoy something. So I think it's about teasing out those differences, isn't it, Chris?
Okay, I love that. We're establishing that, May, you are not a prohibitionist, you're not a teetotaler. You have also been on wine tours, that we all drink, and we've all had some experiences in our lives that have been, can we say, broadly positive, where we have had some alcohol. Let's get the basics down. What happens inside our bodies when we drink booze?
Okay, so I suppose the way I think about this is it is classed as a drug. So obviously you absorb it, it goes into your liver needs to digest it, and then from there it spreads around your body and different parts of the body will deal with it in different ways. And how that plays out is that it goes right down to the cellular level, and then at your cellular level it will be metabolized in various ways. And we know that how that process unfolds has like the immediate effects, in particular the effects it has on your brain. And we know that alcohol is a depressant, which means that it does influence the way in which basically the cells in your brain are talking to each other. And that's why you see the effects on your reaction time, your effects on your emotion, your ability to do things.
So it has quite a wide variety of physiological effects on us. Mm-hmm. In terms of harms, how do we think about the harms of alcohol?
Yeah, so I think this is really important to understand because there's such a broad range of harms associated with alcohol. So, for example, we know that alcohol is causally associated with what's called non-communicable diseases, and we can, again, break that down into many different types there. We also know that alcohol is associated with a range of injuries. And that's also extremely important because that's where we can start to talk about what we might refer to as secondhand drinking, like we do when we talk about secondhand smoking, is that there's harms to others beyond those who drink alcohol.
Oh, I love that. That's a new way of thinking about it for me. So alcohol causes these non-communicable diseases. I guess I'm thinking liver disease being the main one, but there are others too.
Yeah, it's very important to think beyond liver disease as well, because I think that becomes a focus of the harms. And that's quite right, because alcohol is a major contributing factor to liver disease. Whereas if we talk about alcohol-related diseases like heart disease and many other cancers, what that means is that alcohol is not the only cause of those diseases, but there's a range of cancers that alcohol is known to cause. So there's breast, there's head and neck cancer, esophageal cancer, colorectal cancer, liver cancer. And that's really important because these are common cancers.
And then you talked about these injuries and that idea of passive alcohol injury.
This is potentially something that people don't quite think about, or the scale of it is potentially quite hidden when we talk about alcohol. So we know that this is a high rate of harm experienced by young people. And actually alcohol is one of the leading causes of death and disability amongst young people. So for example, ages 20 to 39. So for example, we know that the more you drink, the more likely you are to injure yourself. For example, something like falls. But the other thing to think about in particular is road collisions. addictions. But one of the things that often gets forgotten about, and this was in the case of tobacco as well, is that alcohol is associated with things like burns and fires, which are devastating harms, not necessarily something people are dying from, but has long-term disabilities. And the other really important one is drowning.
Really? Okay. May, can you paint for us a picture of the extent of this problem? You know, Xand and I have worked in A&E, and it can feel on a Friday night like almost everyone is impaired.
I had shifts in A&E where I would see, 15, 20 patients over the course of a shift, and every single one of them was drunk and was there because of alcohol intoxication, but with a very wide range of problems.
This is such an important point because I think the scale of harm associated with alcohol is something that we just don't talk about enough. So if we took it on a global level, we know that there are 2.6 million deaths a year that are caused by alcohol consumption. So that, this is a phenomenal amount of global deaths every year that are largely preventable. And then, as you're saying, Xand, there's the social costs. And we know that even in the UK alone, that the impacts on something like the health service, ambulance, as I was mentioning, though, fire brigades, police, because of the violence, is in millions of pounds a year. Again, though, I think the hospital kind of really shows you that interplay between the short and the longer term. So while you're in A&E dealing with the immediate effects, but I was working actually in my later years in clinical medicine in the oncology wards, is again, I'd see people with head and neck cancer or liver cancer. So again, the hospital is taking the brunt of not only the short, but the longer term impacts of alcohol and the way it's being regulated.
So can we drill into a couple of those non-communicable diseases in a bit more detail? Can we start with cancer? What is it about alcohol that gives people cancer?
So what we know is that alcohol is called what's referred to as a carcinogen, which means that as a chemical or as a drug, it's known to induce cancer in people's cells. And the International Agency for Research on Cancer has deemed that alcohol, after they assessed all the evidence base, that alcohol is what's called a type 1 carcinogen, meaning it's within the same category as asbestos, radiation and tobacco.
And that means that alcohol, the chemical itself, ethanol, which is the kind of alcohol in alcoholic drinks, damages our DNA.
Yep.
And so that's quite a permanent, if you've been drinking through your life, your DNA can get repaired, but that is potentially quite a permanent change that can sort of save up problems for the long term.
Absolutely, Xand. And I think this is where the phrase no level of alcohol is safe, why it's been introduced. And that's because with a lot of chemicals or exposures that cause cancer, what it means is there's no level at which we can say it's safe to be exposed. And that's why that phrasing is so important, because we know that because it's a carcinogen, the more you drink, the greater risk you have of developing cancer. And
so there's the sort of public health expression is the dose makes the poison. The more you drink, the worse the effect is. But alcohol is one of these unusual topics where people have talked about a J-shaped curve, that there's a little bit of benefit at a low dose and then it gets dangerous at a high dose. Do we now have enough evidence to put that to bed? For all the listeners out there who've been reading the headlines going, a glass of red wine a day.
Resveratrol.
We have had so much media coverage about the benefits of alcohol.
Yes,
There is this endless deluge of a glass of red wine a day is the equivalent of an hour in the gym. Yes. And of course, even I read that going, well, that would be great if that was true. Maybe it's a little bit true. Maybe it's only 10 minutes in the gym, but it might be good for me.
It couldn't be completely wrong.
Yeah, I mean, surely they couldn't print it if it was completely untrue.
I think we should acknowledge that, though, that we also want to engage with this evidence, don't we? We seek out information that confirms what we want to hear. So we need to remember that as well. There are many other ways in which you could, for example, protect your heart health that don't come with the risk of maybe developing cancer at the same time. And for example, if we looked at one of the recent global burden of disease studies, and I think there was a headline that said, I think it was 1 or 2 glasses of red wine might be beneficial for people over the age of, I think it was 70 or older. But it's very much dependent on how you work with that data. So, for example, who's in the control group? And when you don't include drinking patterns into those risk curves, the J curves you were talking about, there are different risk profiles if you look at what's called heavy episodic drinking versus, for example, drinking a small amount every day over a long term.
What about dry January? Is dry January a good thing?
Think about that.
But it's not like an immediately.
Oh,
like,
I have to say,
yes, of course it. I thought you were going to say, of course it is.
No. The reason I am skeptical about something like dry January is because I do see that it is promoted by, for example, alcohol industry funded organisations.
No, is it?
Oh.
Yeah. And I think what's really important there is to remember, while, it could be useful for certain individuals, it's not a WHO best buy, for example. It's not a cost-effective measure for reducing alcohol harms.
I'm really dumbstruck by that. And I've always taken it as hard fact, dry January is a good thing.
There'll be people listening going, okay, but I've stopped drinking for a month. Is that good for me as an individual? If you drink 11 months of the year rather than 12 months of the year, can we imagine that would be better for people's health? Do we have data?
So the way in which we can maybe understand or measure the impact of something like dry January is to look at alcohol sales data. And very important work's been done by colleagues at Sheffield University, for example, looking at the dip in alcohol and even maybe a slight uptick in no and low products. What that evidence shows us is that we do see changes in January, which probably reflects the dry January initiative. Alcohol might goes down and no low slightly goes up. But what has been observed is that in February, sales pretty much returned to where they were before January, which means that we can reasonably say that it doesn't have a long-term effect on the amount that people are drinking, which is the most important thing from a public health perspective.
It feels like if this is something that is making you think about your alcohol consumption and it might make you consider alcohol for the rest of the year, then potentially it's beneficial. But actually, there isn't good evidence that it helps large numbers of people.
I think it's just really important that it's not the only thing we do, and that it doesn't become a substitute for more evidence-based policies that we know would work. But I think importantly, it can show people that you don't need alcohol in order to enjoy certain events. It can help people potentially rethink actually how much they were drinking as well.
And to me, the really big thing with these, whether it's harmful food, alcohol, tobacco, is it is not the individual's fault. Nonetheless, our listeners are listening as individuals. Mm-hmm. Many of them are going to be wondering what they should be doing. We're in January.
Just for our listeners who sort of go, look, I have a glass of wine in the evening. How much is that altering their risk of all these things? If we sort of go, look, you're not having any binges, you're under 14 units a week. Between that and zero, what's the difference in your cancer risk, heart disease risk, all those things?
That's going to differ between those different diseases. And so, the risk of cancer is obviously increasing with every amount that you drink. The lower amount you have, the less the risk. It might be something that you enjoy occasionally, for example. But the advice from, for example, the UK chief medical officers is that if you still want to use alcohol, but you want to keep your risk to a minimum, it is having those lower amounts, and that is what's referred to as low-risk drinking guidelines, and that's 14 units a week. But
14 units is the maximum. Not a lot of us think of it as kind of it's almost like the recommended amount, and it's like, no, you shouldn't be drinking 13.9. You should be shooting for much less.
Yes, the lower the better to lower your risk.
Give us a sense of 14 units.
So 1 unit is, for example, a small glass of wine. And what we mean by that is about 125 mils. Again, being cognizant of the fact of how full strength the wine is. And we do see that there's kind of availability of quite high strength wines now. So you need to remember it's approximately a half pint of beer and 1 shot of, for example, gin. And so while the message is there's no safe level, is really about transparency and about being clear to people that the lower the amount, the better for your health.
May, one question we ask all our experts is, how does your research affect the way you live?
So I think for me personally, the way my research influences how I live is recognizing a lot more than I used to, is the way in which my own choices and the decisions that I make are heavily influenced by the environments which I live. And I'm so attuned to that now, I think. When I do choose to drink, when I go to a pub and I do want an 125 and they tell me it's not available or it's not on the menu or that's not possible.
You mean you want a small glass?
Yes. And you will find
Does this happen? I never drink wine in pubs.
It does. And that just makes me realise we tell people to make better decisions, but think about that. I'm not even allowed to have a unit. But it is a legal requirement that such venues actually do provide you with the option of having what is basically a standard drink.
May, that's been absolutely fascinating. Thank you so much for joining us on What's Up Docs.
Yeah, thank you so much.
It's an absolute pleasure. Thank you.